And if you could mute your microphone too, Chris. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Robert Wingley, the Director of the Northwest Earth and Space Sciences Pipeline. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Ben Honey here to give us last science mission at our expert talk for this academic year. So Ben Honey is the Attitude, Determination and Control Officer for the International Space Station at Johnson Space Center in Houston. So he started work in 2009 at NASA. He has a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Prescott, Arizona. He has a master's degree also in systems engineering from the University of Houston, Clear Lake. His duty in the space is in the Mission Control Center, including space station guidance systems during mission operations, training new flight controllers and astronauts, and working on developing new procedures or flight techniques. He's also assigned an integration engineer for the Commercial Crew Program and is helping verify SpaceX and Boeing readiness to launch NASA's astronauts. So this is a really great tie-in. We've been talking about the science and the missions that are out in space, but it requires people on the ground to actually make them work. So take it away, Ben.
Well, thanks for that great introduction. I appreciate that you put expert in quotes, because sometimes I don't feel like an expert. I'm just one of many people that do that job that he just described. So, I'll share my slides here after just like a few minutes. Yeah, I'm one of a team of people that flies the ISS out of Houston. There's about 40 people that do my job for guidance systems and hundreds more that deal with all the other systems on the space station. So for some background, I'm here at Johnson Space Center, one of NASA's 10 or to 13, depending how you count some of our sites, locations around the nation. I know y'all are very focused on the Mars rover, which is commanded out of JPL in California, as I'm sure you know. And here in Houston, we deal with putting people in space, which is just as an important part of NASA's mission, but we don't work with the rovers. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about what I do with the International Space Station, but our mission control building is for all human space flight. So the space shuttle was flown from here. I work with many people that worked on the space shuttle and they trained me. And then all the upcoming exciting missions with our moon program and also helping SpaceX and Boeing fly their new capsules to the ISS to support our mission will be commanded from here. So it's a very exciting time to work in Houston. We do a bunch of projects, not just the space station. A very busy place. I'm sure you're wondering about quarantine and COVID, so I'll just give you a couple seconds of what's going on here. We are still operating out of mission control since we need to be there all the time to watch over our spacecraft and keep the astronauts safe. They're still up there 365 days a year. So we still have our teams reporting to mission control to operate the spacecraft. Those of us that aren't at mission control, we work from home now, which is working pretty well for most of us. And then when we get assigned to actually go into mission control, we still go. So if I'll just share my screen here. Make sure I hit the right button, share. I promise not to throw a bunch of words at you. I'm doing this mainly for visual aids. Let me know when you're seeing it. Robert, does that look good?
Seeing it, and you're in full presentation mode, so it's all good.
Awesome. So here's a great shot of the International Space Station as it looked about 10 years ago. Some things have changed since then, but it gives you the nice wide view of how big it is. The humans live in the small, skinny, circular stack in the middle that looks like a T. And everything across the top, going left to right across your screen, is all the engineering support equipment, like power modules, avionics, and the solar arrays that then power everything. And so there's always 6 people up there in space on the space station doing science on themselves, on animals and plants, and on non-living things too. Experiments into fire and microgravity, all kinds of exciting things, including astronomy, which I'll talk about later. So to keep this space station flying requires, as I said, a huge team of people in mission control. We're there all the time. We never take a break. The only time we ever take a break is when a hurricane comes near Houston. We have to go do it somewhere else. And then we go somewhere else and we keep doing it. So no matter what day of the year it is or what time of day, you can bet there's someone in mission control watching, looking after the International Space Station. And I'll give you a quick tour via Flight Director Mary Lawrence, because she can explain things better than I can. So I'm just going to show less than 2 minutes to this video. Hopefully it works okay for you. And this is Flight Director Mary Lawrence giving a tour of Mission Control. Then you can go look it up and watch the rest of the video.
Hey, Flight Director Mary Lawrence.
Oh, hey.
Do you think you have a few minutes to tell us everything about Mission Control Houston?
Sure.
So can we follow you into the control room?
Yeah, let's go. I'm about to start my shift.
So what's it like in Mission Control?
We fly spaceships. It's awesome.
Do you have a shift every day?
Not every day. I have a string of shifts every few weeks.
How many shifts are there per day?
3.
And how many other flight directors are there?
There's 26.
Oh man, I hope I'm allowed back here. So what exactly does a flight director do?
The flight director is the lead of the flight control team, so they're the final decision maker in all human spaceflight operations.
What's a flight controller?
They do all the work.
What was your first day on console like?
It was pretty quiet. The crew was sleeping.
Is this Mission Control?
This is one of the back rooms that supports.
Oh, how many back rooms are there?
There's several.
How many people support the people in Mission Control?
Could be a handful, could be hundreds during busy times.
What is done in the back rooms that helps out the flight controllers?
They're kind of the second set of eyes. They help out the workload at each of the consoles.
Where's the real Mission Control?
In here.
Oh, can we go in?
Sure.
Whoa. So this is Mission Control.
This is it.
What mission is controlled here?
International Space Station.
Where do
So that's just a little tour so you can get a feel for what it looks like. We have multiple rooms that look just like that one for all the missions I was talking about earlier, since we have more than one spaceship we need to control at any one time, especially soon when we have both SpaceX, Boeing, Orion, and ISS all operating together. So people get designated different consoles in the room, as you saw there, and each one is a specific expertise. So you have guidance systems, power systems, environmental control systems, communication systems, and many more. That's just a very small list of how many we have. And our role there in mission control is to make sure the spaceship keeps functioning so that the astronauts don't have to think about it and can do their job. So if you think of the spacecraft as like a car, imagine you had to both drive the car and also do advanced science at the same time. You can't do it. So instead, we outsource the driving to mission control on the ground so the people in the car can do science and other cool things, go on spacewalks, set up experiments, take pictures of Earth, etc. So the astronauts actually don't really fly the space station. It's almost like a floating building in orbit that they just live in from their perspective. And all of the actual commanding and moving it, keeping it safe is done here in mission control, which is why we have such a big team down here. This is a picture of me on console. This is an amazing place to work. You can tell by how happy I am in this picture. It was probably 2 a.m. when this picture was taken, and I still love it. So like I said, we do stuff all times of day. And in fact, since it's the International Space Station, we work with other countries around the world. One of our biggest partners is the Russian Space Agency, but also Japan, Canada, many European countries, and even more. And because of that, sometimes the most important stuff happening each day is at weird times, like the middle of the night. The Russians might fly a new cargo vehicle to dock, and all the exciting stuff's happening at 3 a.m. And then they'll have to go in and help with that. And then for us, we'll maybe launch like the new Dragon spacecraft coming up in 2 weeks during the day. And so it's the middle of the night in Russia when they're having to help us out. So there's a lot of team support there where we have to, agree on weird times to do stuff. So there's an international collaboration and teamwork aspect of this job that's way more than just this engineering and making the spaceship work. So I've sat at a desk like that to fly the ISS for almost 500 different shifts now since I've worked here. One of the great things about ISS is that it gives us a beautiful perspective on the Earth. Sometimes that gets overlooked because we talk about going to space as being something leaving and going and looking at the universe, right? Especially when it comes to things like Mars rovers, which are amazing. I got into my interest in NASA and space as a kid because of astronomy, things like Mars exploration, and working on the space station has opened up my eyes to how important space flight and space exploration is to understand our own planet and what's going on the Earth. So don't ever let anyone tell you that the two things aren't connected, because they are. A lot of the things we do on the ISS include research about the Earth. We look at, as you can see here, obviously you can see something about the atmosphere there, the thin veil and glow of our atmosphere. You can study the atmosphere. You can look at humans' effect on the Earth. You can see city lights. You can see changes in forests, how they're growing and shrinking based on different types of imagery we do of the Earth. We look at rainfall and soils by doing infrared imagery and other types of science that is above my head. I'm just the pilot. I don't do the science. And so that's a really big part of the ISS program. And the astronauts love to take pictures of the Earth. That's basically their favorite pastime when they're not doing their job, because they get time off every day and on the weekends, like at a real job. And their favorite thing to do is to go into the cupola, which is the name of our little window module, and take pictures of the Earth like this one. You can find pictures like this all over the internet, on YouTube and Twitter, of just beautiful images at night and during the daytime. My job as a guidance controller is to make sure we stay high enough above the Earth that it looks like this. If we didn't have a guidance system on the space station, it would eventually fall back to Earth, actually within a few months, because of atmospheric drag. So even though the atmosphere looks so thin and below us in this image, it's actually dense enough at the height of the space station, which is about 200 miles, to slowly hit the solar rays, those big wings that we have, and slow us down. And so what we have to do is periodic reboosts to keep our orbit higher. So we turn on the rocket engine on the back, add a little speed, and we pop up higher above the Earth. So I actually have another video demonstrating what that looks like to the astronauts on board. If you just Google space station reboost on YouTube, you get several of these.
We're doing a reboost right now, and we're showing that the space station is actually accelerating away from us. We're going to float in the middle of the cabin, and it started already.
So what you're seeing is they're not touching anything.
Stopped in front of the camera.
And Mike Fossum, the commander, is going to start floating backwards, not because he pushed off something,
and we get moved,
but because the space station is going past
him. The space station's accelerating, leaving us behind.
Yeah, that's yeah. Wow. 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 Ooh. That's amazing. I'll do it again.
So one of my responsibilities as an attitude determination control officer is to work with the trajectory planners to make sure we do those at the right time and pointing the right way so it works right. One funny thing about the space station is, because of things like reboosts and other activities we have to do, it's not really a weightless environment. There's all kinds of moving and shaking that happens on the space station. So it's not like you're always free floating in zero gravity. And in fact, we find little pieces of things that were missing, or objects stuck in weird places because they floated away from reboosts and other reasons. Another of my duties in mission control is to train new astronauts. This is our training facility, one of the many buildings we have here at JSC, and that's a full-sized space station mock-up there in the mock-up facility. And astronauts will go in there to get familiar with where things are, as well as to practice procedures, so they can practice putting on their spacesuit and getting out of the airlock. We have smoke machines to practice fire drills, and all kinds of things like that happen in that facility. And so people like me that work in mission control, we learn how the space station works and functions. We learn to fly it. And then once we know that well enough, we are given the responsibility to train new people on how to do it, both astronauts and new flight controllers. One of the coolest training things the astronauts get to do is go into the weightless pool called the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, the NBL. It's the biggest indoor pool in the world. And they put on a real spacesuit and they go underwater and practice doing their repairs on the space station, because being underwater is the closest thing we can do on Earth to being in zero gravity in space, doing a spacewalk. One of the awesome things about the pool is that the astronauts don't just get to go in the spacesuits. The people that train them, so if you come and be a spacewalking flight controller, you actually get to learn to use the spacesuit and do the spacewalks in the pool, so you're a better teacher. So I have friends that are in that group that get to go in the pool just like this in the spacesuits. It's probably one of the coolest jobs here. So you might be asking why we have the space station. It's pretty cool that we get to fly it. I gave you some insight when I talked about looking down at the Earth, but the ISS also enables everything else we want to do in space and explore. The space station is only 200 miles up. The point of showing you this picture is you can see how big the Earth is. It curves so slightly, right? We're really close to home on the space station. It's NASA's outpost where we are trying new things, both ways of running a mission control, ways of designing a spacecraft, learning things about growing animals and plants in space, and also looking out into the universe to learn new things. And what we learn on the space station will help us go farther. One of my favorite experiments on the space station is what's called the AMS, or alpha magnetic spectrometer. If you can see my screen, there's a big piece of hardware on the bottom right corner that has the AMS logo on it. And what it is a giant magnet that collects cosmic particles coming in from space right before they hit Earth and go through the atmosphere. And you can only do this in space because the atmosphere gets in the way otherwise. And we're trying to study the origins of what the universe is made of. So if you've ever heard of dark energy and dark matter, the AMS experiment on the ISS is one of the best ways to help us understand what's going on with that. So if you're a fan of astronomy, you should also be a fan of the International Space Station. And speaking of that, the astronauts have some of the best views of the night sky for any humans. This is a beautiful shot of Comet Lovejoy that came near Earth, I think maybe 10 years ago. You can see the beautiful view of the stars they have and the comet setting over the Earth's rim. We observe eclipses and Venus transits from the space station. So we provide on the scene human eyes on astronomical events that helps our astronomers on the ground learn about the universe. I told you how I got into spaceflight was Mars and exploration and astronomy. So I would be lying to you if I say the space station is my favorite thing about NASA. I think the Mars rovers are probably my favorite missions going on right now. Everyone on this call probably knows what I'm showing here. This is the Curiosity rover at Gale Crater. I'm looking forward to the new rover Perseverance to launch later this year. And what we do at the space station is to help ourselves send people there to find out and validate what the rovers are learning. That's the whole reason we have a space station, is to make sure we know how to keep humans alive in space so they can go to Mars or other places beyond someday and help the robots out. And one of the ways we're getting there is we've asked a bunch of new companies to help us do spaceflight cheaper and better. And I'm sure you all know about SpaceX. In about 10 days or so, they're going to launch a new rocket to the space station. And so we paid them to get people to the space station so we don't have to, and we can go focus on Mars exploration. So here's a quick demo or promo of what that mission is going to look like.
Launch trajectory countdown net. Pad is clear. Go for launch.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition, liftoff.
Separation confirmed.
So SpaceX is going to send 2 astronauts that are NASA astronauts or test pilots, Doug Hurley and Bob
Dragon,
Behnken,
separation confirmed.
on this spacecraft. So they're kind of like test pilots. They're shaking it down, making sure it's going to work like a new military airplane where you want to check it out first. And And then once this mission's successful, we're going to send people on regular missions to go and live on ISS. We'll be able to get more people on the space station, and we get them there faster and cheaper. This is really exciting because it's the first new American spacecraft to be designed in decades. So there's a lot of new cool technology we didn't have the last time we designed a spacecraft. Even the space station was designed about 30 years ago. So it's a beautiful LED cockpit, advanced guidance systems. SpaceX is designing to be fully reusable as well. So it's going to launch from Florida, like all previous American space flights have, and it's going to land near the Florida coast. And SpaceX has their own recovery ship, so you can see just out the window there in the video, the little white dot's supposed to be their recovery ship. And they land in the ocean and they get picked up and come home. So what's so exciting about the Dragon mission is both that SpaceX is helping us to enable space flight, as well as the fact that they are designing in so many new features that we've never seen before, as I said. So that allows us to get our other programs, PowerPoint skills, online faster, and someday we'll be then operating Mars missions out of this mission control building here in Houston. So this is basically America's Center for Human Spaceflight, where I work, in all past and future missions of exploration get commanded from here. So that's my my talk on who I am and what I do. I'm hoping that spurred a lot of excitement and maybe some questions I can take.
Okay, Robert, do we have a preference? Do we want to have everyone chat directly to you again like we did last time?
Yes, let's do that. Chat through us first, and then we'll ask your questions for it.
And if you have any questions about the ISS and what it looks like, I have a handy dandy Lego model for demonstration purposes. So hit me with all your fun ISS questions.
Questions? Let's see, just put them in the chat. And okay, start my video again. All right. As we wait for questions to come in, it's kind of sometimes a little bit shy. Let me ask you this question. So we talked about I don't know whether you showed the model of space station, but I don't know if people actually understand just how big it is. Could you put space station in terms of, say, a football stadium or something?
Yeah, I can do that, and I can also show you with the model. So the space station, the livable space, is like the size of like a 5-bedroom house in terms of how much space you have to live in. So when there's 6 people living up there, sometimes they go the whole day. If they're working off in one corner on their own experiment, they might go the whole day and not see their friends unless they went down to have lunch with them. So it's big enough you can get lost and go hide yourself. When you include the truss and the solar arrays, so just get this here for those that can see, the livable space is this thin middle structure. And then all this other stuff is all not livable space. It's just there to hold the solar arrays and other equipment. It's like the size of a football field in both directions. And in fact, I've got a little model dude. So for those that can see, that's the person size. And you can see how small he is compared to the space station. So it's hundreds of feet long in both directions. And we actually keep adding pieces to the space station. There's a lot I could talk about the space station. I didn't talk about how it was built. It was brought up in about 50 or so. I don't have the exact number, but many dozens of space launches, space shuttles, and also Russian rockets, and then assembled in space. And so we just keep adding pieces to it, which is why Legos is a perfect way to build a model of it, because it's just like the real thing. And in fact, the Russian Space Agency has plans to launch a big new module that's something like 50 feet long very soon in the next couple of years. So it actually keeps getting bigger.
Chris wanted to know, what are rules unique to the ISS?
Rules. I'm not sure I know what Chris is getting at.
Well, you have, like, we just put a CubeSat launched it from space station, right? And so you have a whole lot of rules about volatiles, about what can be taken up to space station, right? Because if it decides to go bang, it's bad for the astronauts. So you must have special rules, right?
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of rules. So the challenging thing about the space station is that it's not built for just one thing. As I just described in my intro, we do astronomy, life science, human science. We have to live there. So we have to have rules for all those things. They all have to work together somehow. And so, for instance, there are some experiments where we're like trying to grow crystal materials in space to see how they grow differently. And they're very delicate, especially in zero gravity. They can create complex structures, but you have people floating around bumping into things that can break the crystals, right? So we have a lot of competing rules, actually, from all kinds of directions about how we can operate the space station. We want to be higher in orbit because it means we can defeat the atmospheric drag that I had talked about, but we want to be lower because it's cheaper to get rockets when you're lower to Earth. So almost every day you have rules like that that are in conflict. And one of the funnest parts about being a flight controller, and it's the same on Mars rovers at JPL, I've read books about the challenging mission planning they've had to do, is that problem solving. That's not stuff you can figure out when you're designing the space station. It's once you're operating it and using it, you start to figure out all these fun problems that you have to solve. So there's so many rules, I couldn't list them all.
Okay, guys, so I'm not seeing the full chat list, but I am seeing the summary that you guys are typing on. So a question from Lara is, are the astronauts affected heavily by the lack of gravity at the ISS?
That's a great question. Humans are affected by being in zero gravity, in free fall in orbit. And for those that don't know it, we actually refer to it as microgravity more often, because really you have gravity. It's just that being in orbit puts you in free fall. So we like to call it microgravity. And we're affected greatly, but over the past 50 or 60 years of human spaceflight, we have learned how to counteract it. So on the space station, because it's so big, has so much space, we have a lot of room for what we call countermeasures, or ways to fight back against microgravity affecting the human body. And so we have a huge gym. We have an exercise bike, 2 exercise treadmills, a weight machine, ways for the astronauts to do other exercises without the gym equipment. And so we're very good at counteracting the muscle and bone loss problems we've seen. There are other things we're still learning about that we haven't been able to counteract fully. We've seen issues with eyesight, something about the pressure and the weight on your body not being there changes your eye shape, and it affects eyesight. So we were able to deal with some of it, and we're still learning about others, which is why, like I said, we still need the ISS for those human experiments. We can't send someone to Mars for 3 years yet, because we really don't know what's going to happen to them. We're still learning that. Yeah, I think that answers the question. Had another thought and it escaped me.
Okay, this question is from Eliza, but I also wanted to add a tag along, is that maybe a lot of people haven't heard that we're going back to the moon with Artemis. Could you tell us when you think that's going to happen, and how is that affecting what you do at Mission Control?
Yeah, so the Artemis program is what NASA's calling our initiative to go beyond the space station. So we want to use what we've learned and go somewhere further for longer to learn about how to live and learn scientifically about wherever we visit, which right now we're hoping to start at the moon. In previous iterations of the program, we've talked about visiting asteroids, and then hopefully in the future we can go to Mars. So that's the long-term vision. We got to start small, like we did with the space station. So we're trying to get to the moon in the next few years. There's a lot of challenges to starting up any new rocket spacecraft and spaceflight program from all angles. You've got the actual technical problems of designing everything, and then you've got to find the money and time to get it done. So I'm not going to give you a personal guess other than that our current goal is to launch the next test flight of the rocket and spacecraft at the end of 2021. And if that goes well, we'll keep progressing towards putting people on future test flight once we think it's safe. Yeah, we're hoping to put people on the moon again in this decade and have a more permanent presence and can study new parts of the moon we didn't visit back the last time we were there. Oh, I'm not hearing you right now, Robert.
No, I hope.
Now I can hear you.
Yep, my my internet connection is unstable. I'm getting that. Okay, so Selena wanted to know, how are they handling crew swap during COVID-19?
That's a challenging one. I'm not personally closely tied to the decision making we've had on what countermeasures to use and how to be safe. We are proceeding with the ISS mission. We're going to keep launching our planned flights of cargo and crew and bring crew home on schedule. We always implement quarantine on astronauts before they go to the space station because even if you don't consider this current new virus, there's, you know, the world is full of diseases that you don't want to take to space, both because you don't want to get sick when you're on your, you know, your life's goal of flying to space, and you don't want to be an issue for completing the mission of doing the science up there. So that's a normal thing we always do. We quarantine the crew pretty strictly for a couple weeks before they fly always, and we keep track of who they see. So I don't think they've had to change very much, but it is something we're thinking about, and they're making sure that they consider the differences of this new disease compared to other ones, and make sure we protect the crew. But it's definitely something we do and has always been part of what we do at NASA before spaceflight. It's different like if you're going up for a little flight, like a couple days, but since we launch our astronauts to the space station for months at a time, they stay anywhere from, usually the shortest is 100 days to up to a year. We recently had a astronaut come back. She was up there almost an entire year. So you really don't want to take some new disease with you if you're going for that long.
I also wanted to ask you, with Artemis coming on board, will that be a new control room, or will you run both Artemis and Space Station from the same control room?
That's a really good question. Yeah, so in the video I showed where Mary Lawrence tours us around mission control, she takes us into one of our many main control rooms. We have about 3 that are that size that are currently ready for use. So we only operate any one spaceship mission or spacecraft from one room. So there's clear command structure with who's in charge. So we're ready to go on multiple missions already. Back when the space shuttle used to visit the space station, we'd be down the hall from each other in the 2 control rooms. And now that space shuttle isn't flying, we've converted one of those rooms for Artemis use for the future.
Wonderful. Tori wanted to know, what are the astronauts eating? That's
a really good question. The astronauts, that's another reason the ISS program has been so useful in developing future spaceflight, because if you're going to go to space for a long time, you need to make sure you have a good diet, right? Diverse so you don't get bored, but also diverse so you get all your nutrients. So space food in the early days wasn't great for long-term use, partly because it just didn't taste good. Don't take my word for it. The astronauts say so in their memoirs. So we spent a lot of effort on the space station program to diversify this food that's safe to take to space and make it packaged in a way you can eat it. So they actually eat pretty much the same foods we do here on Earth. It's just the way we package and store it to eat in space is different. So for instance, I've actually got a example here. This is a lemon lime drink bag. So it's like a Gatorade.
You see that?
And so the powder in this bag is just normal Gatorade. It's just a special bag we had to design to transport it safely and then drink it. So it has a special little nozzle that hooks up to the machine in space that's a little spigot. So it's like if you had a little attachment on your fridge where the water comes out, where you just stick it right on and it fills up with water, and it's like a sippy cup, it won't dump out. So they eat all kinds of stuff, stroganoff and shrimp cocktail and hamburgers, and we even send them special Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners. So they have a very wide array of food.
Excellent. Mary and Chris, I'm not seeing. Okay, here's a couple more questions just popped in.
Thanks for answering my question.
Li Ling wanted to know, how did Ben get where he is now?
Well, I could spend a long time talking that. So how do I summarize? I've always been a space geek. I can't remember a time before I was into NASA and astronomy, partly due to my dad worked at a telescope growing up. So I had a really obvious way to get engaged. And then when I got old enough to start studying science and math and engineering, I got pretty hooked on engineering through a high school robotics program that I joined. So that steered me into like what little piece of spaceflight I wanted to focus on. And that's why I went and got an engineering degree. And then I studied aerospace engineering in college at a really cool school called Embry-Riddle. It's very small. Some people haven't heard of it, but they're a big name in that degree program because of how good the program is. And at NASA Mission Control, we hire people straight out of college, which I didn't know until I got to college and they came recruiting. I thought you had to be some big brain PhD guy from MIT to work at Mission Control. And it turns out you don't need to be. They're just looking for people with college degrees and a really good sense of teamwork and motivation that can problem solve while applying some technical skills. So I came straight here right out after getting my college degree.
Excellent. So many of our kids right now are part of the student challenge, and they're getting both science, engineering, and those problem-solving skills. So I'm glad to see that you mentioned those, and that our kids here can actually start thinking about using those to move forward in some sort of STEM career.
Yeah, and I'll add to that one footnote is that something we talk about in Mission Control when we think about who's good to hire to be a flight controller, what we look for in hiring, we would rather a B student who has shown they're awesome in teams. And that doesn't mean they're always the team lead. It just means they work well in teams than an A student that can't show us that, right? Because a big part of what we do in Mission Control as the flight controllers, we're not the people that do the math to design the spaceship. Someone gives us that design and we have to figure out how to make it fly safely and keep the mission going. And so we're always doing teamwork, trying to solve problems together with our colleagues and other control centers around the world. So it's a lot of that collaboration and less of the bookwork engineering part of STEM.
Yeah, I think you answered the next question about what backgrounds do people have in mission control. But maybe you could answer a little bit further that you say that there's a whole lot of different controllers present. You want to talk about maybe what some of their qualifications are, or is it all the same, or do they come in with slightly different backgrounds?
Yeah, we have a wide array of duties for the ISS Mission Control. So I talked a little bit about how I'm in charge of the guidance systems, which is one of the more technical systems, but we also have mission controllers that their whole job is what we call inventory and stowage, which is like keeping track of where everything is on the space station, which sounds, well, maybe it doesn't sound easy, but it is harder than it sounds because it's such a big space station and there's so much stuff up there. So that's not really, if you think about what the skills that requires, you don't need to do any engineering or math to deal with inventory and stowage. You just need to have a really good spatial awareness and be able to manage lots of data and communicate it. And my point of explaining that is that those people don't need to have engineering degrees. So we hire people in that have some STEM related degree, but it doesn't always have to be engineering. So we've got computer science, physics majors, math majors. It's just each type of specialty requires a different background.
Yep, absolutely. So there's so many different specialties that you guys have at Mission Control. It's good for the students to know that. All right, so this one's always a tricky question, but can't pronounce your name. So Daria wanted to know, how can Curiosity take a selfie?
That's a great question. No, that's always
always a good one
to explain, because the thing about space photos and imagery, especially from space probes, is that to send a spaceship way out into the solar system, you've got to make things really small and compact, and it's got to fit on a rocket. It's got to be light so we can get it far. And my point of that is that you can't put really big fancy cameras on them. Usually they're scaled down and really specific to one thing. So they might have a narrow field of view or only look at one wavelength. So usually a really pretty space picture, unless it's taken by an astronaut on the space station with a camera, handheld camera, it's usually multiple frames put together. Either the colors or the pixels. And so the Space Curiosity selfie, it's taking its arm out like at arm's length, like literally like a selfie, but it's taking more than one picture. It's taking hundreds of pictures like this as it moves around. And then a human back on Earth processes those and puts them all together to make the pretty picture that we see. And so that's why it works.
Thank you for answering my question.
I think Robert froze up. We'll give him a second to come back.
Okay, I will. While Robert's frozen, I'll take over asking some of the questions. So we're also, as you know, on Facebook Live, and someone over there asks, do you have any feedback on SLS launch delay? Heard it's being pushed back until the end of 2021.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that go into designing a new rocket. And I don't work directly in that program, so I don't know a lot more than you all do, but I know part of the delays are due to the virus kind of slowing work down, unfortunately. But also when you're designing a new rocket, you run into technical problems. So usually the first flight of any program slips past when you hoped it would fly. But we keep getting closer. That next flight is going to send an unmanned Orion capsule out to the moon and back. So we're going to learn a lot from that about both the rocket and the spacecraft. So it might take us a while to get that first launch off, but once we do, we're going to learn so much and be ready to fly the next flight sooner. So I just hope we can get there and get through some of the challenges right now that are in the way.
For my students, even whether in the challenge or building their own equipment, I always tell them they're right on schedule for being behind schedule.
There you go.
Other questions? I haven't seen any more.
I keep accidentally sending them to people privately. I apologize to everyone I've done that for.
All right. In mission control, there are different stations, and each station has a very unique mascot for it. Could you tell us a couple of them?
Oh, someone knows, got the insider info there. Yeah. So let's see if I have visual aids here. Yeah, so in mission control, especially for the space station, since we're there 24/7, each console gets kind of their own personality and sort of team vibe. And one way that we do that is with, imagery and mascots. So, for instance, the guys that are in charge of communications, they're called Cronus. One of their mascots is a little 8-ball, because the joke is when the flight director asks, "Hey, Cronus, when are we going to get comm signal back?" they shake the 8-ball because they don't really know the answer, because it's a challenging problem to solve. At my console on ADCO, we have a baseball bat that says attitude control device on it to play on words about attitude control officer. And what's another one? Spartan is an obvious one. That's the power officer, so they named their console Spartan so they could use sort of like a Spartan helmet imagery from Greece. And then there's one flight controller that is called Pluto, and it's an acronym for something to do with, I don't actually know the name off the top of my head, but they deal with the onboard IT systems, and they've got like a little Pluto dog on the console. So sometimes we actually make the console names something that can be our mascot, as you can see.
The next question, I don't know who submitted it, but what types of animals have been on ISS?
I don't know the answer to the full list because there's so many experiments that happen up there, but I do know some of them. We've had spiders experiments and other types of insects. The most common animal to visit, I think flies too, is one that's pretty common. Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of rodents. Usually mice, I think, but maybe other species as well. Partly because, as you might know, health science has a lot of background on studying rodents, so it's a great analog when you're doing new experiments, especially in space. So we fly a lot of mice to the space station to do different types of experiments on them. Some of the science on bone loss that I was talking about earlier has a lot of background in rodent studies.
Laura wanted to know, how do you maximize the amount of sunlight on the solar panels on ISS?
That's a great question. I'm going to use the model a little bit for that. So the solar panels rotate in 2 directions. They're like a big paddle wheel on a boat. So they can rotate this way, and that's like the paddle wheel motion. So this, all 4 on each end can turn together and track the sun. And then each of the 8 singular panels can rotate on their own in an opposite way to the paddle wheel motion. So if the sun's up here, you can turn this and then turn each solar array to point exactly where the sun is at. So basically the idea, in an ideal world, you always want the flat surface to be pointing directly at the sun. And that's why they designed it this way, so you can do that. There's other things that happen where we can't always do that. One thing that's interesting about the space station is the solar arrays are so big, they stick out way in front of the docking ports. So the docking port's here in the center, and the solar array port sticks out dozens of feet past it. So if you have a visiting vehicle coming in to dock, it actually flies past the solar arrays to get there, and it's firing thrusters to find its port. And those thruster firings can damage the delicate solar arrays because they're just kind of thin blankets. So when I was telling you about conflicting rules that we have, one of them is we want to point the solar arrays at the sun, but we also want to keep the thruster firings off the solar array. So one of the most complicated problems we always have to solve for every single different event is which position to put the solar arrays in to get the best sunlight without breaking them from thruster firings. And that's a very challenging problem. So sometimes we have to sacrifice power for the solar array safety temporarily, and we make sure the batteries are full for that period of time. That's a great question.
The questions are starting to really roll in now. I wanted to know.
They found out that I give long answers, so they're.
You know, that it appears in a lot of literature that a rotating space station can counter some of the weightlessness issues. What do you think of that? The question.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand that. Something to do with weightless. Can you say it again?
Yeah, so there is in the literature from Michael, you know, rotating space stations can produce artificial gravity.
Yeah. So, yeah, artificial gravity due to centripetal force. Yeah, for sure. So, in fact, the original ISS design included a module that was big enough to rotate and have people in it, just for that reason. And it got down selected due to programmatic reasons, money, time, that kind of stuff. And so we didn't fly that. But that idea has been around for a long time, and it's a really smart idea and would work. It's just that you have to make the things that make it rotate not conflict with other things. So if you think back to the last question, if I took the space station and started spinning it fast enough to give you gravity in the modules, it would be spinning so fast that the solar rays couldn't find the sun. So that'd be a problem. So a lot of the other things you design into your systems would have to change for a rotating space station. And then you'd have to stop rotating it to dock to it. There's a lot of good movies that have depicted that problem. I think off the top of my head, Interstellar, Armageddon, and 2001: A Space Odyssey have all depicted rotating space station docking scenarios. Some of them better than others. But the point is it's hard, right? So
Yes.
Part of the reason we haven't done that yet is humans have only flown like 4 space stations ever. The Russians 2, Americans 2, and Chinese 1 that I can think of. So 5. So that's really not that much. So we'll probably do it eventually. We just haven't got the designs there yet.
Okay. Aline wanted to know, is it true that there's always an American and Russian on the space station?
Absolutely. So the United States and Russia are the 2 biggest partners or contributors to the ISS, both in terms of technical expertise and time and money we've put in it. So part of the program is to make sure everyone gets their fair share of time of their astronauts flying to their partnership. So because we're the 2 main partners, we pretty much always have 1 Russian, 1 American on every launch, and then they're always up there. But we also have other major partners that contribute a lot as well, like Japan and many European countries and Canada. So what we do is that we trade off which country's astronauts is the guy in charge, the commander, and then we occasionally rotate in the smaller partners. So we've had commanders from many European countries, Japan, Russia, and US.
Let me ask you a follow-on question from that. Do the American astronauts learn Russian or the Russians learn English?
They are both required to take foreign language classes in each other's languages. And so English and Russian are both considered the official languages on the space station. And the skill of every astronaut, of course, varies. And depending whether the commander's American, Russian, or Japanese, depends, you know, what language is spoken the most. But yeah, everyone learns both. In fact, the American and as well as the other non-Russian astronauts spend quite a bit of time, months of time in Russia training before they fly, both learning about the Russian systems and how their mission control operates, as well as language classes.
Excellent. Henry wanted to know, do the panels on the space station get dusty or need to be cleaned in space?
That's a really good question. I actually don't know the answer. I know that one thing that is a problem is what we call erosion.
Yes.
And so stuff will hit it and damage it permanently. So because we're in space, we're above the protective atmosphere. So things like cosmic rays, atomic oxygen, other things that can hurt material will hit it and make them less good long term. That's like a permanent damage thing. If they actually get covered in dust that has to get cleaned, I don't know. That's a good question. I think the other impacts are worse from the other damage.
Yeah, it's actually dust at high speed.
Yeah, most dust just pokes a hole in it. So that's why I think probably not, but I'd have to ask someone else that knows that better than me.
Question, is there a place we can find what specialty each mission control position has or needs?
Yeah, so there's a couple of good references online for some of that. In fact, if you just go to Wikipedia and look up like the NASA mission control flight controller position page, just use those keywords and I think the right page comes up. There's a page that have been put together of all the historical position names, both from Space Shuttle, Apollo, and now ISS. There's also a really cool website called ISS Live, all one word with an exclamation point. And it has some good materials on some of the main console positions as well.
Okay, I'm going to let Arlene ask the last question. And it is it true that there's always an American astronaut on board that has an amateur radio license?
I know there's a ham radio on the space station. They use it a lot. I don't know if we have a requirement that we have to always have someone with a license on board. That being said, though, astronauts are astronauts, right? They like to be pilots. They like to be radio operators. They like to be scuba divers. So I'm pretty sure you're just going to end up that way just because of astronauts being go-getters. But I don't know if that's like a rule that we always have. It's a good question, though. They like to talk to like schools and stuff over the ham radio.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. And I think on behalf of all the audience, both on Zoom and Facebook Live, that we'd really thank you and appreciate all your time for today's efforts. And so thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. This was great. Had some really good questions, better than some that I've had before and stuff like this. So I could keep going if we had more time. I wish we could. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you for participating. Appreciate it, Ben. So we'll stop recording. And you guys can type your thank yous in the chat.